is right. All of us are right, but the figures speak for themselves. Eurostat says that there are 95 million Europeans are at risk of poverty, including energy poverty. In most cases, we're talking about women, particularly single mothers. The situation for children is becoming dramatic, and we need to act because this is an increasingly serious situation. We have the energy crisis, we have an economic crisis, and all this has a knock-on effect for children and indeed for our future. We need to say to Europeans that we are responsible for all of this, that the energy policy is leading us to a disaster. Even before the war, we'd created an energy crisis. We've got to think about what we're doing. We have to think about what the European Commission is doing, what the European Parliament is doing. We have to look at things as a whole. We can't, on the one hand, say to Europeans that they need to pay more for food or for energy, while at the same time say that we need to help those people who are at the risk of energy poverty. We have to be honest, our children deserve that.
Thank you very much. The next is...
Next speaker is Jose.
President, Commissioner, the Child Guarantee was created to respond to the shameful situation which in one of the richest areas of the world, Europe, meant that millions of children were living in poverty without access to decent food or the fundamental public services that exist. The programme is an important one and was designed to be so, but doesn't have the necessary resources. And it makes no sense for that to be the case. That can't continue. The European Commission has announced new programs, which are fine, and the member states are responding to humanitarian crises like the refugees from Ukraine and other crises of other refugees that have fled without, however, providing new resources for these new priorities. We can't have new priorities respond to new emergencies with the same amount of money, or ESF plus less money than existed in earlier budget cycles. If we actually want to be able to do what we have said we will, then we need new resources, more resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Prosím, máte slovo.
Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. The first call to set up this guarantee for children came from the European Parliament in 2015. At the time, people were very skeptical about it, but 6 years later, the Commission came up with a draft recommendation. Now nobody has any doubts this is a very important initiative. We can't simply look the other way and not see that in Europe we have children who are socially excluded, who don't have access to a hot meal or to housing. That is unfortunately the case, and it's the case in all member states. I think that instead of the situation improving, it's actually got worse, particularly after the COVID pandemic. You might think that the current crisis, the energy crisis, is also going to hit very young children. If we want to reduce child poverty by 2013, that is a very ambitious objective. We need to act now. Every month that a child lives in poverty, that leads a child closer to exclusion and into a downward spiral that is very difficult to get out of. So can I call on those member states which have not yet done so to submit their national guarantee plans? I'm also in favor of having a separate allocation for these objectives in the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next is Mr. Alex Agios Saliba. Please, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Commissioner, 1 in every 4 children in the EU is at risk of poverty, at risk of social exclusion. The pandemic has further worsened the situation and has added 150 million children at risk of poverty. The war of aggression in Ukraine has put further pressure on children, with the most vulnerable being the ones who are most negatively impacted. These statistics are shocking and will have a long-lasting effect on our children. It is for this reason that it's important to keep fighting for the child guarantee. We would be hypocritical if we kept on speaking on youth guarantee without allocating sufficient resources for this guarantee to be implemented on a European level, but also on a member state level. It makes no sense that plenary session after plenary session, debate after debate, we speak of this need of 20 billion euros for this guarantee to start working. 20 billion euros, which are truly important to come from the MFF, which is to be worked to its full potential. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. As next is Mrs. Adiche Alieva Veli. Please, the floor is yours.
Уважаеми господин председател, уважаеми
President, Commissioner, Minister, colleagues, the sharp increase in the prices of energy and food has affected particularly adversely the vulnerable families and children. They don't have access to basic services. The European Union has to support children who are vulnerable and need support. And the child guarantee is an extremely useful instrument to that effect. Today, more than ever, we have to invest in children and fight child poverty in order to help them overcome the energy and food crisis. We don't have to squander our biggest wealth, children and youth. Bulgaria is among those member states where the share of children at risk of poverty or social exclusion is the highest, 24%. There's restricted access to education, health services, good nutrition, accommodation, and we need a special budget for the child guarantee for all these reasons, and I categorically do support this. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. As next, Mrs. Tilly Metz, please, the floor is yours.
Herr Kommissar, Garantien für Kinder sind seit 2021
Since 2021, children established as such, but children hit by poverty, do they get the necessary education, health care, the necessary living conditions? Are they provided for them? So establishing children as such, that isn't enough. We have to guarantee all these very fundamental things for them. More families are confronted with the high prices, inflation, and we have to provide for them. The question is, how can we give each child the same opportunities when there simply isn't enough to go around as things are? We need guarantees for more investment, and that in the correct direction. Even now, we have reflected in this the educational system, the health issue, social injustice is everywhere, private insurance, and private education as well create a situation that is unfair for children in a difficult position. How can we speak about children without some sort of system in place which would get rid of this 2-3 class system, this multi-tiered system? We have to provide for children so that all children have equal opportunities in healthcare and in education. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. As next, Jean Lacapelle, please, the floor is yours.
Chers collègues, protéger les enfants.
Colleagues, protecting children, improving their fate, of course, is something that's very praiseworthy. Access to education, to decent food, housing, all of that is vital, and I'm in favour of protecting children. But in a time of energy crisis, an explosion of living costs, we have to ensure fundamental rights are maintained by ensuring we have the necessary resources. If we don't do that, the European Union is only being hypocritical and is saying it's trying to repair things that it's destroyed it. If children are hungry or cold, it's your fault. It was your irrational, senseless, blind policies that led to sky-high increases in energy and food prices. All of that was predictable. We said that would be the case. You didn't listen. Today it's the children who are paying the price of our bad choices. Do you know in France some schools actually are setting their heating at 11 degrees and it's so cold in class that the children have to be sent home? Did you know that because of price rises, households have to decide how long they can have the heating and the lights on, and that's the result of your fortuitous choices. Europe is in a bad place to preach on the situation that it created. Your incompetence has led to Europeans' unhappiness. You have said that what we need is targeted sanctions, more nuclear and more investment in energy. Can we have confidence in those that have led us to where we are? I think instead we should listen to those who predicted what would happen and listen to their solutions for our compatriots and for our children.
Thank you very much. As next, Beata Kempa, please, the floor is yours.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie przewodniczący, panie komisarzu.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, Madam Minister. Children are the first victims of all crises, and for that reason we have to do all possible in order to protect them, to help them. In my country, in Poland, over the last years, the number of families that live in difficult conditions has dropped to 4.9%. That is the best result since independence in 1989. Well, why? Because of success of policies that have been introduced, fighting against mafias, fighting against energy mafias. We've been fighting for families, and children have emerged from poverty. But with the war in Ukraine, unfortunately, these objectives and what has been set forth as a target by Mr. Timmermans, well, I don't know if really we will be able to carry them out. We have to take into consideration the fact that we have a war going on right next to the European Union. Putin is exporting crises. He's exporting hunger throughout the world as well. We have children hungry in Lebanon, Syria, and Africa because they haven't received the necessary wheat from Ukraine. So this is the result of Putin's policies. The EU has to provide an effective response. We have that energy package, but unfortunately, it is not leading in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As next is Mrs. Sandra Pereira. Please, the floor is yours.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The Child Guarantee is an important tool to provide immediate responses to around a quarter of the children of the EU who live in poverty and social exclusion. Its application in the Member States already led to conclusions, but the resources aren't enough to compensate for the lack of family income as a result of inflation, as a result of the wars and the sanction policies of the EU. For the Child Guarantee to have a genuine impact, it's vital that we significantly increase the funds allocated to it. But fighting child poverty requires structural policies to guarantee that we have universal, free, quality education, including for primary education. We need universal, free, high-quality health services. And we need to ensure that parents can have decent work properly paid, time to play, for sport, for culture, for civic involvement, the guarantee that people can live in a world of peace. As Nelson Mandela said, history will judge us on what we do to defend our children on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. The pandemic, the energy crisis, the security crisis, the refugee crisis All of these create a new reality which we are confronted with. And of course, this guarantee is very important because it gives us the chance to help those children who are in vulnerable situations. Any serious analysis shows us that for child welfare can generate a 4 times increase of any investment in society. This is why it is fundamental to allocate consistent resources so that these objectives of the child guarantee do not remain on paper idealistic objectives. Member states have the obligation to act more firmly in a more determined manner to support children who must benefit from good quality medical care, education, decent housing, and of course, decent and adequate nutrition. This is why I think it is very important that we do not stay in this area where we talk about objectives which are not implemented then by the member states. And this is where I think Commission must be much more firm and member states must create the conditions so that the child guarantee becomes reality and brings more welfare to children, especially vulnerable children. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. As next is Mrs. Helen Frison. Please, the floor is yours.
Kommissionär. Ja, 1 av 3 barn i världen.
Well, 1 in 3 children in the world have been hit by poverty and climate crisis as well. This is something that has been, of course, registered in numerous different worldwide reports. And with this particular crisis, we have to think about children because it is their future. And we know that it is a very difficult situation right now, very difficult for many, many families indeed. Many have been struck down by the situation and children have been seriously affected.
Growing up in poverty has a very negative impact on children's futures. And if we're to get rid of child poverty and end the energy crisis, we must have political will and we must prioritize children. And the child guarantee is one important tool for this, so that every child in the EU can grow up in security and can enjoy their security, certain securities. They should all be able to have hope.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Paola Guidoni.
Grazie.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Minister, colleagues. Children are our present and our future. And I'm speaking both as a mother and a grandmother. There's so much remains to be done to guarantee both a present and a future that will be a dignified one, a decent one for so many children. In Italy, 1.3 million children live below the poverty threshold. Larger families are those that are at most risk of poverty. With sky-high energy prices, food prices, Europe needs to do more to support those families that are most vulnerable. What we need are extraordinary measures to provide a better future for so many children who today are suffering and who are both economically and socially vulnerable. Europe needs to show that it exists for its youngest and most vulnerable citizens. Time has run out. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Margarita de la Pisa Carrion. Please take the floor.
Presidente, comisario, colegas, lo importante es que los fondos.
The thing is that the funds that they reach children, and the reality is that today all national plans have been presented, but what we have to do now is look at the money. Is the money actually going to children? They're vulnerable, and there is misuse of funds as well. It's very, very easy to manipulate situations as well, with very, very serious consequences, where institutions have not been scrutinizing effectively, and they have, and of course the harm has been irreparable. Numerous examples in Spain as well. Now, it's really strange that people don't trust parents, but people trust institutions. The funds have to go to families, to the parents, so that they can support their children, and it is only thus that we will be able to make sure that there is greater guarantee of money reaching children, the real individual.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Helmut Köking. Please take the floor.
Ja, vielen Dank, Hohes Haus.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor on this very important subject. Every fourth child is poor in Europe. Of course we need the budget, no doubt about that. There's too little money available. And what also comes to bear, of course, is that often we have people speaking with forked tongue. I remember that I wrote a report where I laid down the idea of monies for children, and 300 MEPs voted no, or sorry, abstained, and they have to take the responsibility for this. I am in the Party for Families in Germany, so I know what we're talking about. We have to decide how we tackle this. How can we survive if we ensure that the families of the future do not have the necessary basis? So how can we tackle the future if we haven't dammed up for criminality? Nothing happened again, so let me call on you again. Let us take action. The budget is very low, but nevertheless, let us take action. Let's look at all measures to see whether they're in the interest of children, and let's really fight child poverty.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much, colleague. Our next speaker is Ms. Gabriele Bischoff. Please take the floor.
Herr Kommissar, Herr Minister, werte Kollegen.
Commissioner, Minister, imagine if this space here was filled with children, and we would see the distribution of children that don't receive proper education, don't receive a warm meal, don't receive proper health care. We would see over half of this room occupied by individuals suffering under these circumstances. Children this year will not enjoy Christmas, but we have the opportunity finally this week for a dedicated budget to provide for that. With the financial crisis, we had the youth guarantee, but it didn't work for the child guarantee. So I think it's neat. The time is right for all groups to call for this particular text to be signed, for us to pass this, to push it through for sustainable investment for and while we have very, very little money at our disposal, actually much can be done even with that smaller amount.
Thank you very much, colleague. Our next speaker is Mr. Lukas Mandl. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're discussing today is a guarantee at European level, a guarantee that children can grow up, have a happy childhood, and grow up not in poverty. That's the best thing that could be done. The child guarantee is the best thing to be, but we know that children extend your sensitivity to crises from the outside. We see that the energy crisis particularly hits families with children, and that's why the child guarantee is so important. So I can only 100% endorse the view that this is not the right place to start saving money. We need to support children. Next year is European Year for Skills and Competences. We need to ensure that children are educated, that they're given skills, and that they're happy in being educated in these skills. We call Austria Child Austria because we've been doing that for a long time. Children are brought to the fore. We have monies for childcare and for education. Children are the most important.
Veľmi pekne a ďalšia vystupí
Thank Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Rosa Esteras Ferragut.
Thank you, President, dear Commissioner, Minister. The war in Ukraine and its consequences in Europe increased even further the need to support children in situation of poverty in Europe. Energy prices, food prices, all of those are affecting many children in Europe. Therefore, Europe must react. ESF Plus is based on national pre-allocated financial envelopes. Such envelopes can only be increased by modifying the MFF. We call on the Commission to come with a proposal for a dedicated budget to turn the child guarantee into reality. This supplementary program with a dedicated budget will complement the ESF Plus with additional support for tackling child poverty on top of the national pre-allocated financial envelopes. This is not a new policy that would duplicate the existing ones, but a key EU-wide boost that would be essential for providing support and assistance to children in situation of poverty. Children are our future, and no child should be left behind. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Thank you very much. And I do apologize, Madam Plumb, and of course, Madam Esteras Ferragut. Now you have the floor.
Gracias, presidente. El 21...
Thank you, Chairman. 25% of children in EU are at risk of poverty or exclusion, which is almost 18 million children. If we add in the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, the food crisis, COVID, inflation, never before have so many families fallen so rapidly into poverty in Spain. We're the third country in terms of risk of child poverty behind Romania and Bulgaria. 1 in every 3 children in Spain is at risk of poverty, which is much higher than the European average. And it's the 6th country in terms of child inequality. The child guarantee is absolutely vital and that all children in Europe have access to fundamental services, education, free healthcare, decent food, decent housing. Children should be at the heart of all our policies so that we can break the vicious circle of poverty and protect them. And that is absolutely vital, particularly for the even more vulnerable children, those with handicaps.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Alicia Homskiller. Please take the floor.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner Schmidt, Minister. The pandemic, Putin's war, and the increase in prices, inflation, has, of course, caused us to revisit our social protection systems. And what are the consequences, the most direct ones? Well, levels of poverty and inequality which are unacceptable, very, very high throughout Europe, and children, girls and boys, which are seriously affected, the most vulnerable indeed, with this cycle of poverty of an intergenerational nature, because it is an intergenerational problem. We have to strengthen social protection of young people, of children, and create a system of universal rights to be accessed and enjoyed by all, of an inclusive nature, in other words. Healthcare would be included among those, and in certain areas we've seen a dismantling of these systems. But we need a budget for all of that, an adequate budget in order to provide all of these guarantees for young people. Look at the resources from the European Social Fund Plus, a specific program which has been put together in the past with bringing together a number of different programs. But children, boys and girls are our present, and they're the future as well. We have to now, in our Europe of opportunities, provide to them all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Vilnia Blinkevičiūtė. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is unacceptable that in the EU, one of the richest parts of the world, children live in poverty and their number is growing. The COVID pandemic has shown, together with the war in Ukraine, that child poverty eradication systems are not as robust as we thought. Therefore, regrettably, we have to assume responsibility that as much as 18 million children now live in poverty. Child guarantee can be instrumental not only in terms of lifting children from poverty, but also it can prevent them from landing in poverty. Therefore, it should have a dedicated budget. Not all the member states take the child guarantee seriously, and even 9 member states still have no national implementation plans. It only proves that pan-European actions are most important in dealing with child poverty. Yes, we need